So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday night Anamkara meditation program. With all my heart and with all my love, I welcome you to our program this evening. Tonight is the first Thursday of the month, so we start the cycle of programs really focusing on Dharma, practice in everyday life and in the world. So we'll be getting into that this evening. And of course, the program components of chanting and meditation are always a part of what we offer. And we begin with the opening mantras. And the opening mantras are a way of helping to really quiet the mind, give it an opportunity to step back from all the things it's been engaged in all day, all week, to come home to ourselves, to come home to that place of spaciousness of being, that openness of awareness that has the graceful ease of presence, even with the mind, even if the mind is agitated. That quality of being is always there. But our attention is so caught up in the mind, we're often not aware of that. So mantra, the power of mantra and the opening mantras, is a way of helping us shift our attention from the forest of the mind to the clear spaciousness, that wide open sky of being that holds all of that. So we'll start with the opening mantras. Mata Kali Devi Ki Jaya Gajananam Bhutta Ganari Sevitam Kalpita Jambo Palacharu Bhakshanam Umasutam Shoka Vinashakarakam Namami Vigneshwara Parapankajam Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishate Om Shanti 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 Shri Mata Kali Devi Ki Jai. So once again, with all my heart, with all my love, I welcome you to our program this evening. So great that you came. Thank you for bringing the power of your presence, the power of your practices, and really your divine essence, the truth of who you are. That is the divine one, and that's all there is. And tonight and these programs on Thursday evenings are ways of both deepening our experience of that, celebrating that living presence of that, feeling the empowerment of that, to be able to walk that into the world. That's what transforms our mind, our body, our life, is knowing the truth of who we are and then living it into the world. Right? So bringing that fullness of being, the beauty of Buddha's description of the four immeasurables as these qualities of our essential nature, the boundless loving compassion, the boundless wisdom, the boundless rapturous joy, and the unshakable infinitude of equanimity. So many words to describe just this one nature of being. But to know that, to become immersed in that, to be able to feel that, experience that moment by moment as we live our everyday life, that is the gifts of practice and the grace behind those practices that have been handed down to us by great beings and sages and saints across traditions, coming to know this themselves and then passing on the means for knowing it for ourselves. Not enough to have faith that somebody at some other time had that experience. We have the instrument for knowing that fully, totally here and now. So to make the best use of this human life, this rare, precious gift, is to engage in that practice so that we can fully know that and live that into the world. And that's really part of what I want to be talking about tonight, is that process that we engage in. And from the Eastern traditions, it's spread out across lifetimes. But that process is often described as the hero or the heroine's journey. And that was a theme of Joseph Campbell's book on the hero's journey, and the monomyth is what he called it, because we see it as this singular mythic truth that describes the journey of so many great beings, from Buddha to Christ to Krishna to Ram, to heroes and heroines throughout different traditions, the saints and sages, and understanding that again, as this kind of archetypal form, also informs our life if we shift our attention. Because part of what happens in this culture that we're in now is our view of the meaning and purpose of life. Well, that is passed on through culture, through our families, through our religions, through our Western culture, and it informs how we look at things. What's the relative importance of things? What are we pursuing? Who we are is conditioned by those different factors. And yet, there are other ways than what we've been given to be able to look at what the true nature of who and what we are. And in fact, the meditative traditions, the contemplative traditions, the mystical traditions offer a very different view of what's the nature of who we are and what's the meaning and purpose of walking this planet, living this life. So getting some clarity on that and being able to see, oh, there's a different way of being able to engage that. Because there's a myth that informs our Western culture about what does it mean to be a human being? What is success? What are we doing on this planet? And a lot of it is informed by a rational materialist philosophy, as it's called. And scientific materialism is one aspect of that. But that the material life, our identity with this body, this gender, the roles that we play, that this is the key to knowing who we are, and that there's a myth about that we don't even think of as a myth that informs, then what's the meaning? What does it mean to be fulfilled? What does it mean to take care of our needs? And a lot of them wind up being related to fulfilling material needs and other ways of approaching what are needs for power, for notoriety, for fame, material gain, status, all these different things that inform everyday life that we just take for granted are part of our cultural conditioning. When we begin to enter and pursue a meditative path, especially beyond sort of the model of stress management, That's a good model for dealing with stress and using meditative practices to help reduce that. But the meditative paradigm is much bigger than that. And part of what it really highlights is much deeper questioning of that sense of who am I? What am I? What am I doing here? And it's the unfolding of that many of the practices and the philosophies that are offered through the meditative traditions give different answers to those questions than what our culture might or what our family upbringing might have given us. And by way of expanding our experience, they offer a more expanded view of who we are, what's the nature of this experience. And shifting into that kind of different paradigm of looking can be part of what is engaged when we're talking about what Joseph Campbell was writing of in terms of this hero's journey. That it's a way of stepping out of the ordinary world, meaning the ordinary conditioned experience of everyday life, trying to, take care of family, make a living, express some of our creativity, go to work, deal with the interactions and the dynamics of work, all the mundane aspects of everyday life. And that also keeps us very focused on the ordinary mind, the ordinary ego mind, how it was enculturated and conditioned to look at itself in relationship to other things. So that's the package we're kind of given. But then for various reasons, people start to look beyond that. Various forms can be discontent. Some people, it's a numinous experience of being able to have a glimpse of who and what we are and what this reality is beyond the ordinary mind that sets them on that journey. For some people, the calling to that journey can be something really painful and traumatic. It can be a disease. It can be a near-death experience. Many things that begin to sort of push on the boundaries of our ordinary consciousness, our ordinary way of looking at the world that we've inherited through the conditioning of our families and culture and everything, to say, wait a minute, there's more. Sometimes just an intuitive sense of there's more. Sometimes it's, we've read about the lives of sages and saints, and what are they doing that gives them access to something so far beyond the ordinary mind and the ordinary experience. And perhaps we feel that calling that, I want some of that. I want to know what that is. So when Joseph Campbell was looking at this kind of paradigm of the archetypal journey of the hero, he discerned that there was this myth, whether we're talking about what Moses went through or this great figure or any number of both historical figures, but even in the context of performance. I've worked with peak performing athletes on a hero's journey, and their journey is focused on going beyond and pushing the limits of what their body and mind can do to perform. So there's different ways of being called to kind of push the boundaries, push the limits of who we thought we are, to go beyond that. But when we start to see, as Joseph Campbell lends his vision of that, and it's a great book to read on the hero's journey, his writings, we can see that there are what he called these different phases to that journey. And we can see those phases also in our meditative practices, in the yogic sphere, in the Buddhist sphere, because those practices and those philosophies were really aimed at saying, wait a minute, there's a journey that's going to take us beyond the ordinary mind completely, beyond the realms of our ordinary identity and the confines of that. And so both that leaving the ordinary world is part of that initial phase of having to sort of answer that call maybe a call of the spirit, a call of a dream, a call of a vision. Or it might be that we can feel, in a sense, almost abducted, because there are myths that go with that in terms of what it is, that it wasn't just a conscious call or a spiritual call. We can suddenly feel ourselves like we've been pulled into this journey. That can be because of an accident. That can be because of a loss. That can be because of death. That can be a loss of a career and what happens economically. There are many things that can thrust that journey upon us that we weren't seeking, we weren't looking for. It's also part of what's written about in the journey of Persephone and Demeter. Demeter was the great mother goddess, and her daughter Persephone, or Corte, being abducted into the underworld by Pluto, this male god, and symbolic also on an archetypal level of what's happened in a kind of transpersonal domain to the divine feminine, being pulled underground by a toxic masculine kind of dynamic. And that's a whole other talk or seminar. But looking at that there are these various ways that we may feel called or have the calling thrust upon us, to start to separate ourselves from the ordinary world and begin to see that, I'm being called to another journey. And what's going to happen on that journey? What kinds of things? What are we going to gather? And these are also themes and dynamics that I went into a lot in the book, The Soul's Journey, Guidance from the Divine Within. So there's a phase of sort of waking to that there's a call, or we've been thrust onto a journey. And then we're going to start to look around and say, well, we need help, This isn't a do-it-yourself. If we're going to go beyond, especially the confines of the ordinary mind, we're going to need a guide, a mentor. And so the archetype of the teacher, the archetype of the guru, and this plays out as a part of that journey. And again, that can be everything from in Olympic sports, who's going to be the great coach that's going to help give you the teachings and the lessons and help develop the physical abilities and the mental abilities to compete at that ultra extreme level. Or it can be a guide, a mentor into the inner worlds, into what happens as we start to go deeper into meditative practices. And there are many experiences that can unfold that can be very confusing for the mind. They can also be deluding to the mind. And so a mentor and a guide across mythic spiritual traditions has been recognized as such an essential component for being able to navigate a territory that we just haven't been familiar with. Not to mention that the very thing that we're trying to get past is the thing that's trying to walk the path. The ordinary mind, the ego mind, my sense of I and me and what am I doing? So we need a perspective outside of that ego mind's domain to help, to say, oh no, you thought you were over here, but watch out, there's a cliff over there, you're gotta avoid that. So we need guides, we need mentors to be able to make it through this inner landscape. And in the hero's journey, as it continues, the practices are aimed at helping us go from the kind of the everyday, ordinary world into a mythic domain, right? And in the meditative tradition, that's that inner domain of consciousness. In outer mythic and real life situations, that can be pushing beyond. That can be the Olympic athlete going to the Olympic village to train just with other athletes because they can't be distracted by ordinary worldly things. That can be people going into ashrams, monasteries, to have that really secluded and dedicated time and space. That can be each one of us going into our meditative practices for whether it's 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it might be each day, that too is the very same dynamic of we're setting aside the ordinary world to cross the threshold into this other domain. And that's where, in the meditative traditions, that's where the hero's journey takes us. And it's also why in the Eastern traditions, the greatest hero was the one who conquered their mind, not the one who conquered other kingdoms or lands or whatever. It was that inner journey of really being able to conquer the limitations of being bound by this mind and our consciousness being limited to the thoughts and feelings, perceptions that are part of that mind. So crossing that threshold and going into this other domain, as we're going in, we're being also guided by the teachings, the practices that we've gotten from a mentor or a teacher. And these days, sometimes it's people relying just on a book because there's nobody around for them to be in dialogue with or really go deeper with. But that helps that because now we're being informed by hopefully a well written and a genuinely experienced teacher who's put into writings that kind of offer to help people who may not have right with them the kind of guide or teacher they need. But this unfolding, this practice of then going in and dipping in to this transcendent domain, that's part of the hero's journey, because that's part of what it means to leave behind the ordinary world and the confines of the conditioned mind that's associated with that. Now, being called to explore and to know, wait a minute, there's something much greater, something much bigger that we are feeling called to, or we've heard through other sources that says, oh, there's something much more profound, much more meaningful to be engaged in. And on that path of now separating out from the ordinary world, we're going to face different challenges. And those challenges are going to force us to take hold of certain qualities, certain abilities. In the meditative tradition, as we go in, well, immediately we're confronted with the power of the mind to just take our attention hither, thither, and yon, over and over and over again. We're trying to stay just resting on the breath. We're just resting on the mantra, this throb of the infinite, of Om Kali Ma. Seems so simple. And yet when we go inside and try to just stay with that, the mind keeps veering off here and veering off there, and we keep pulling it back and pulling it back and pulling it back. That very process is developing strengths and powers that to the ordinary world can almost seem supernatural because it develops a level of focus, a level of attention that we then, when we come out and go back into the world, we have those qualities, we have that strength, we have that capacity that we developed in the course of pursuing what it is to go beyond the ordinary mind. So it also informs everyday life, but it's demanding more and more of that kind of powerful attention and capacity of attention. And then the ability to let go, to profoundly let go of the sense of who I am. Right? Because the meditative traditions and the heroic task of that practice is to get free of the confines of that sense of who I am. And that's why the practices of self-inquiry are a component of that, asking ourselves, who am I now? Who have I become now? Even if we're sitting in meditation, a thought arises. Did we become the thought? If we did, we have to let it go. Just watch it. Don't become the thought. A feeling arises. It's one thing to say, oh, I see anger arising. Then there's you and there's anger. You've differentiated consciousness from that. You've freed it. Now you have an extra degree of freedom in relationship to what arises within. But when we become angry, we've become the angry. It's like we become possessed by it. And then people say, oh, I'm so angry. Well, now you're in that little container that's bouncing around with that energy of anger. What's to be in that? We don't let that go. The freedom to quickly and gracefully let go of these things is also part of what develops through meditative practice, as well as starting to see more and more the other component. So self-inquiry is a way of looking at how we enter the containers of thoughts and feelings and roles that we play, how we get identified with it, separating out our consciousness so we can see, no, that's a role, that's an idea, that's a thought, that's a feeling, that's a whatever, that's not me. Begs the question, that's not me. Who am I? Who am I really? And how do I get in touch with that? And that's where, again, the practices and even the kind of initiation into deeper levels that happens through the power of consciousness. That's why we talk about that power of consciousness that is a throb of the mantra, the throb of the infinite that takes form of mantra, can give that initiatory, in other words, that kind of level of awakening, the power of consciousness to start to really unfold that. That can happen through, that can happen through a yantra. That can happen through a tanka. That can happen through a mantra. That can happen through being in the presence of one who's awake and aware. Right? So many ways that initiation of that deepening of consciousness, that it's going to allow us to know the fullness of our being, of who we are. So that then we can then pursue that even further, that letting go and letting go and letting go. How do we let go into dissolving into mantra? Well, in a sense, we use the same qualities of mind, habits of mind, that get us identified with a feeling. I'm annoyed, or I'm happy. We're used to saying, I am, and then whatever follows that am describes something we've become in the moment. Well, in the Kundalini Shakti traditions and the Tantra traditions of like Kashmir Shaivism, that power of words to shape the container that's going to then hold the consciousness and give us the experience of what that is, it's called Matrika Shakti, the little mothers, the little powers that give birth to experience moment by moment through thoughts and ideas and our identification with them. With the use of mantra, we turn that same dynamic, but now instead of identifying with a limited container, we're going to identify with the infinite. That's what we're invited to identify with. So when we're repeating a mantra, it's with the awareness of I am the source of the mantra. I am the infinite. I am Kali, right? Om Kali Ma. I am Kali. I'm the Divine Mother. I'm all that is and all the forms that she gives birth to. Right? So now we're making use of the dynamic of mind to identify with a thought, but now the thought is what's called a pure thought. Pure meaning free of duality, free of separation from the infinite. That's what that refers to when we think of a pure thought in the yogic sense. And so when we're identifying with I am Shiva, I am the auspicious one, or even if we're doing a Buddhist practice and the Buddha, a mantra, for instance, Om Mani Padme Hum, invoking our Buddha nature, the jewel in the lotus, our Buddha nature. But it needs to be done with that awareness of I am Buddha. I am the boundless consciousness. I am that. So that's, and again, now we can understand that when we use a mantra like Hamsa, I am that, it's all encompassing. It's everything. I'm Buddha, I'm Shiva, I'm Kali, I'm Krishna, everything. Nothing left out. Nothing left out. Limited, unlimited, all. I am all that. So the hero's journey is going from the limitations of finite experience to opening the doors to the infinitude of who we are, even while knowing what it is to remain finite. It's not an either or, it's both and neither. Oh, that's beyond what the mind can think of. Both and neither. Well, that's like a koan. It stops the mind. That's the nature of consciousness. It's not going to be held by a concept. It can be held by any words. So we approach it using that power of mantra, power of awareness, the awareness of I am that, the awareness of I am the infinite. So it begins as a practice where we're repeating that, because think of how many times, consciously and unconsciously, you've repeated, I am something limited. I'm a limited bound being. I'm a limited bound person. I just feel this. I am just that. People say, oh, it's just the way I am, as a defense. That's not a defense. It's just a statement of how caught we are in the mind and its self-definition in that moment. There's no truth in that unless it's the truth of, that's just the way I am the infinite. Okay, good. We have to let go of all those finite identifications to know that, and then be able to see the dance of consciousness taking on limitations without giving up its boundless nature. That's what it means, the both and more. So the hero's journey, that may be something that we're practicing in our meditative practices. We're practicing moment by moment, shifting, letting go of this thought and the identity that's a part of that, shifting it over to mantra and the boundlessness of that. And then the mind contracts and our consciousness contracts again with it, and then letting it go. And then it contracts, and then it's letting go. And we feel like we're rocking back and forth, right? Until we get more and more stabilized, more and more able to watch the mind without being identified with it, without entering the mind as an I am awareness. I am the boundless one. I am the infinite. That becomes the background awareness for the waking state when we're actively engaged in the ordinary mind and fulfilling our dharma in the world and the roles that we're given. But then in those times when we can shed that call to dharma, that call to duty, and sit in meditation, or just be walking, and what's calling us is now the infinitude of being, even while walking. So these moments can just open up that spaciousness, that fluidity, that purity of being, and the boundless love, the boundless wisdom, the boundless compassion that goes with that. And that is a particularly important component of being on the hero's journey at this time. Because we need to be going into those states where we get to see the truth of who we are and the truth of all beings and all creation. And the hero's journey is always about the return as well. We don't just sit in our room meditating quietly until the body falls away. We get up and we engage life. We bring the treasures. We bring the gifts that have unfolded in meditative practices. We bring that expanded awareness, that openness of heart, that generosity of being into the world, and the power and the strength that goes with that. And that's especially important at this time, in this age. We've spoken about it in the past, about Kali Yuga as an age where Dharma, that living in accord with one's highest nature, is at its lowest ebb. And so in the absence of that, people are living in ignorance. And out of that ignorance comes so many lacks and wants and needs, insatiable wants and needs, that then leads to what we see in terms of domination, exploitation, the ruining of the earth, the ruining of so many species going extinct. It just breaks the heart to see what's going on, all born out of ignorance. Not knowing the fullness of who we are, we inflict the suffering on ourselves and others. So wakefulness, being awake to our fullness, and then walking that into the world, into the halls of power, into corporations, into businesses, into government, that we have to do that now. That this is an age where the practice is meant to be lived fully into the world. Not in monasteries, not in caves. The whole world needs us. In the last 40 years, we've seen thousands of species go extinct because of what our ignorance is doing to the planet. We see millions and millions of people dying because of ignorance and greed. There's enough wealth in the world for everyone to be cared for everyone to be fed, for health care for everyone. The only thing that's in the way of that is ignorance. And out of that ignorance, the voracious greed and hoarding that individuals and corporations and governments engage in, that inflicts more and more and more suffering. We need to bring wakefulness, the power of wakefulness. And with that, the power of that love, that compassion, that can cut through and see, no, we need to be taking care of everyone and everything. That's what we have to be also bringing into the world, empowered by our interior knowing, the direct access. Because without that knowing, to face and be awake to the suffering in the world is crushing. It's literally crushing. So we need to know the fullness of our infinite divine self that empowers us to get up each day and walk into the world in every way that we can, in any way we can, with greater love, greater compassion, greater wakefulness, to see how we can empower others to know their fullness and walk that into the world. This is part of what the hero's journey is now. It's not just about going off and becoming enlightened and then taking Mahasamadhi and being done with it. This is why Buddha talked about the bodhisattva vow, vowing to keep coming back as part of this hero's journey across lifetimes, to keep coming back until all suffering beings are free of suffering and all the causes of suffering. That we're called on that now to be able to do that. And if we are really listening, then we know what Tara, the great mother, Ma Kali, the great mother in all her forms, knows the cries of the suffering. All beings. Knowing that, we know we're called on to help relieve that suffering. We know we're called on to deepen the direct experience of the fullness of our being, so that we really are empowered to make those kinds of changes. Because Buddha relentlessly pursued his hero's journey and set aside all the riches and everything that his father, the king, wanted him to have, and pursued the extremes of asceticism and set that aside and came to the middle way and still was absolutely determined to know the path to the freedom of suffering. Nearly died doing that. And this is often part of the hero's journey, where we're pushed to the absolute limits, so that then that transcendent power of our own self, the archetype of the divine, God, Divine Mother, we access that. That's part of what drives us to let go of the limitations of mind, the limitations of ordinary being. Then we're flooded with that. Then and only then do we really have the fullness of strength to be fully present, both with the profound suffering of this world, and simultaneously know the domain is completely free of suffering, completely free, with that boundless rapture, the boundless love, the boundless compassion, the unshakable equanimity is the heart of who we are. Knowing that, we can walk into the world and then offer that vision to others. Offer ways of getting free of suffering. Being present, compassionate, empowered presence. That's what we're called on. And that's what meditation genuinely empowers us to engage. So the great mystics, the great saints and sages, knowing this, see the divine embrace of all that is, even while tending to the suffering of others. In the past, the incarnations of the infinite that have come into this world to help relieve suffering were individuals. Krishna, Ram, Buddha, Christ, others maybe not of that level of what we would call in the Eastern tradition avatars. But it's said even in that tradition, the next incarnation may not be an individual. It's a collective. Can't just rely on an individual to save us. We are the saviors of this world. It said that the next one is the embodiment of love and compassion, empowered love, empowered compassion, to balance again this world, to bring our institutions into service of the highest. Not into the service of greed, not into the service of predators. That's been the perversion of these institutions we've evolved. We have to transform them. That's what we're called on. Even while we're called on to do our everyday dharma for our family and our loved ones. So the calling happens on many different levels. And some of them we don't want to hear. This is also part of the archetype of the hero's journey. The refusal to hear the call. I don't want to hear that. That's too much. Too much means we've become too small. When we're identified with smallness, so many things are too much. Identify with the fullness of your true nature. Nothing is bigger then you. You encompass it all. You embrace it all. You're empowered by the divine to live that love, that compassion, that wisdom, that steadiness into the world at this time. You took birth at this time. You took birth in Kali Yuga. Just like Buddha, Sakyamuni Buddha, said that he waited till Kali Yuga to take birth in order to support the relief of suffering, to bring the ways of meditation and practice of Dharma into the world. Well, you're the Buddha of your life. You took birth in this age. You're a meditator. You're called on. Know the fullness of who you are and be fully empowered to walk that into the world. That's the call of the hero's journey. That's the call of the real depths of the path of meditation, the path of mystics. We're called not just to help ease the suffering of the mind and body, of our own mind and body, but the collective mind and body, the mind and body of humanity, the mind and body of all living beings needs loving attention. So listen to your own highest self. It's called you to be fully present, to be fully knowing, fully expanded. Live the fullness of who you are. The world needs the fullness of who you are. Right in your life, right here, right now. Not somewhere else. Right in the divine web of relationships that each one of us is in. Light it up with your light. So to do that, we take refuge in the practices. We're empowered by the practices. So we're going to chant now. We'll be chanting a mantra. Om Kali Ma, Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma. Calling on the Great Mother. The empowered Great Mother. She was ferocious in her wanting to set beings free. So it's a ferocity of love. And a fullness of love. A rapturous presence of love. An unshakable love. Know that as yourself. You know what it is to inhabit the tiny, tiny, tiny containers of the mind. Time to throw open the doors. Know the infinite as your own self. Om Kali Ma, Kali Durga Namo Namah. Kali Durga, names of that infinite mother. Namo Namah, I bow to you. Own self. So as we chant that, remember, with that awareness, I am that. I am that. I am that boundless energy. It goes beyond any form, beyond masculine and feminine. It's that infinitude of presence. I am that. And then at the end of the chant, we'll just sit in the stillness and just invite the mind. Keep coming back. The mind is moving, coming back. This Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma. Until all of that is washed away. And there's just the boundlessness of presence. Loving presence. No inside, outside. No self and other. Just all. All. Self-luminous, loving presence. And now we'll begin. Oh. Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma. Kali Durga Namo Namah. Kali Durga Namo So we end with this prayer that may all our practices truly benefit everyone, and may all beings know complete freedom from suffering. Namaste. Om Kalima. Om Kalima. Come home to the fullness of who you are. And walk that into the world. So I want to thank you for being who you are, and being ones who practice walking the truth, the wisdom, the love, the compassion that is your nature into your everyday lives in any way that you can. Thank you. Thank you. This is the great call of this age, this time. Thank you for answering that call. Thank you for bringing the power of your presence, the power of your practices and commitment to this evening. Again, with all my heart, with all my love, I'm so glad you came this evening. I look forward to seeing you next week.